Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, inside the New Mexico U.S. Attorney's Office, we speak with Alexander Ubaez about his background and his work to address the state's troubled history of murdered and missing Indigenous women.
It really is coordinating the efforts, making sure everyone is sharing information, and then of course making sure that somebody is paying attention to the names on the list so that nobody is forgotten.
And the beloved Bosque at the turn of the seasons, recognizing one of Albuquerque's greatest treasures. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm Lou DeVizio. 2023 has been a year of transition here at New Mexico in Focus. Longtime host Gene Grant moved on to fulfill one of his passions at Animal Protection New Mexico. And we welcomed in our new executive producer, Jeff Proctor, who's helped reshape our show. But we haven't slowed down. Now as we approach the holidays, we're looking back on some of our stories and interviews from the last year. In the second half of the show, Hourland's Laura Paskus sits down with author Michelle Otero to talk about her new book and how the act of writing can heal past traumas. Then in about 40 minutes, New Mexico in Focus correspondent Antonia Gonzalez speaks to the director of an organization that's distributed monthly menstrual products at no cost throughout the northern part of the state over the last few years. This year, Free Flow New Mexico installed 3 period pods in Santa Fe. They're self-serve kiosks with period products available 24 hours a day. Antonia asks about the project and why free access to those products is so important. But we begin with an interview you'll only see on NMPBS, a one-on-one discussion with U.S. Attorney Alexander Ubaez, 2 years into his tenure serving the District of New Mexico. Here's correspondent Russell Contreras.
Alex, thank you for joining us here at New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started on your role in the U.S. Attorney, take me back to where you grew up and who was your family and how did you get here?
So I grew up in the Bay Area, California, to an immigrant mother and a father who's a high school graduate from East LA. Most of my family on my father's side is still in LA. He grew up in Lincoln Heights there and went to Lincoln High. My mother was born in China and so immigrated here when she was about 7 years old. They met in LA. My dad was a musician, he was a rocker. My mom was a costume designer. And so they met down there. They moved up to the Bay, where I was raised in the Bay Area, from Martinez and then high school in Oakland.
Your father you said he was a rocker, but he was a legend to East LA Chicano history. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Happily. I'm just so proud of my dad and the things that he has done in his life. It's incredible how much you get done at such a young age just by being creative and passionate and community oriented. He was born in the projects in downtown LA, actually the William Meade Housing Projects, Vadio Dogtown they call it. Then grew up in Lincoln Heights, where he started a band. He taught himself how to play guitar by watching mariachis play. He put together, and he just has this amazing creative mind for melody and for composition. And so as a teenager, he was organizing and running these bands out of East LA, teaching them how to orient their instruments and their sound. And so he was a part of this band called the Romancers. He was the lead. And out of the Romancers sprung many of the bands out of East LA, but he had his finger on so many different historic moments in Chicano rock out of East LA in the 60s. And it's just incredible hearing the influence, in his music and down the road. He's an icon down there.
And how did your mother, in her history as an immigrant, come into the States from China, how did that shape you when you get into law?
Sure, there's a lot to carry, when your folks come from overseas or over a border, and you're the first and only attorney in the family. And so, ironically enough, the conception of what lawyers do to my folks was very much like you go be a lawyer, you're a professional, you go make money, right? Like you go to law school and you get a high-paying job. And it was a thing that really confused them. When I came out of law school and took a job here for the DA's office, making $32,000 a year. And they're like, we don't understand. Why was this what you did? And this doesn't make sense to us. And so having parents who don't come from from professional backgrounds, and being the first to, wear a suit regularly and have a professional title, has been an interesting line to walk for me.
Now, New Mexico is one of the poorest states in the country. It's got deep entrenched inequalities. What attracted you to this U.S. Attorney job?
Well, I'll start with what attracted me to New Mexico, and it's my wife. She is part of two generations deep New Mexican families here. And we've been together since we were 19. We met in college. And so ever since around then, I've been coming out here with some regularity. And then we moved here in 2011. Now, how I ended up as U.S. Attorney has been a crazy path. It's really sort of a series of accidents. Having no guidance in my family on what it means to be a lawyer meant that I was often forging my own path. And when I ended up in law school, I really didn't have a sense of what lawyers did other than make money. And so when I got there, there was a lot of soul searching in finding the profession that would coincide with my morals. And that's where I struggled the most, which was, and I think this is an affliction of the legal profession broadly, being a lawyer means you represent a single client, be it an individual or a company, and you represent them at the expense of everything else, right? That is your job. You are their voice in courts and through the papers. And I struggled there, right? Because I'm oriented towards the community. I became, I've succeeded, I've studied, I've graduated, and I've sought jobs because I care about the community. And something in that role didn't square with me. So when I ended up in law school, I did a lot of learning about what lawyers do, about what the legal profession is, and then about how I can fit the legal profession into my morals and my beliefs. And so I ended up as a prosecutor first, through the mentorship of a couple folks in my law school who showed me that as a prosecutor, and it's broadly in government service, what you do is serve the public. You have one client, but that client is the United States, right? It is all people, and as it comes to prosecutors, what it means is I represent not just the interests of the community broadly, but very specifically the interests of everyone in the courtroom, right? So as a prosecutor, I walk in and I represent the jury, I represent the judge, I represent the defense attorney, and I represent the defendant. And so for me, that realization of, as a prosecutor, I wear all hats simultaneously. As a prosecutor, I am a public defender first. What I do with every case when it comes in is I review it for legal sufficiency, right? Is there elements of a crime? But beyond that, I review it for constitutional violations, right? Has this person's rights, the defendant's rights, been violated? And I review it on top of all of that for justice. And that is the most important component of being a prosecutor, which is our discretion to charge or not charge, to use the tools that we have to seek charges, to seek prison, or to seek other alternatives. And so making all of those decisions really puts me in the seat of a public defender first, and then I go into court and advocate once we've indicted someone or charged someone. And so the path to finding prosecution and government service was one of exploration and learning. And that's finding my passion in it. One thing I found out about myself is that I'm really bad at things I don't care about. And conversely, I'm good at things I do. And so what I've always done is follow the passion, which is tied to my community and tied to my morality. And it's led me here to this seat where I feel like I'm best expressing those abilities and those values.
You come into the office at a time where law enforcement across the country aren't reporting their crimes to FBI. New Mexico is no different. We have a number of law enforcement agencies that not only not reporting their FBI crime, but their hate crimes. What can we do to compel some of our local agencies to give us that data? Because you can't decide policy without the data.
That is critical. I couldn't agree more with you about that. One thing that I've prioritized, in this position and throughout my life, and that has moved me forward amongst, in the profession, to the position where I am today, is the building of networks and teams and communities. Right, and so when I say that I do it all for the community, it includes the community writ large, as all of us in New Mexico, all of us in the nation, all of us in the world. but it also includes smaller communities and networks that make this thing work, right? And so that includes the law enforcement community. One of the things that we need to do is work in closer partnership with our local law enforcement partners and elected officials to make sure that we are working towards the same goal. One of the things we've done in my office since I came into this position was expand the amount of contact we had, just pure contact, with local law enforcement around the state. And the goal of keep getting everyone on the same page and moving forward to the same goals. To that effect, what we've done is create a liaison program. We have liaisons, AUSAs, federal prosecutors in my office who are responsible to go out to build relationships with local DAs, local sheriffs, local law enforcement, so that we can best fulfill their needs, we can best support them as partners, and they can do the same. And so I think for me, while there are always alternatives to compel people to do things, the better alternative is always to convince people to do things because it's the right thing to do.
Now, the Trump administration halted DOJ reviews of police departments. The Biden administration came in, restarted reviewing cases of pattern and practice investigations. And stats show that New Mexico has one of the highest rates of police shootings in the nation. Many of them are Latino and Native American victims. What can your office do to address this? As the Biden administration has been very clear, we want to review police, make sure that everything's done up to par, but if their investigation is needed in a possible consent decree, they will pursue it aggressively. What can your office do in that space?
Sure, we've, as you know, partnered in a consent agreement. Partnered in investigation and then in settling a consent agreement with the city of Albuquerque for many years now, relating directly to a pattern and practice of excessive use of force. We are unique here in New Mexico in this department in that we play an active role in partnering with DOJ, both on the investigative side and throughout the pendency of the consent agreement. This is pretty unique for us. We, because this is our community, we have always had the stance here in the United States Attorney's Office of New Mexico that we should have a voice, those of us who live here, should have a voice in how those investigations are carried out and how the consent agreement is pursued and implemented. And so that has been our consistent stance throughout the 9 years of our consent agreement, with a constant attorney in our office, and often multiple, entered in that case to move it forward. And so that is our approach, which is very New Mexico unique, and in pursuits of and in furtherance of the Biden administration's policies here.
Murdered and missing Indigenous women has been something you've been passionate about and you've spoken out here. Is there anything else that we can do besides a public education campaign to really address it? We've had a lot of tribes here in New Mexico. It's still a concern. Our tribal governments are short-staffed with police as everybody else. Is there something else that can be done in that front? Yes,
I think there's a lot that can be done. And there's a lot that we're doing. So one of the things that we always need, every agency you always hear, is more resources. So one of the things that we have done is advocate at Main Justice, and we have received a large number of additional positions to come to our office. 5 of those, I think actually 7 of those new positions are slotted for Indian country because of the need in that area. One of those, and I announced this a couple months ago when the Not Invisible Act Commission was meeting here in Albuquerque, one of those positions is a missing and murdered Indigenous persons coordinator, a regional coordinator. And so this is an attorney, an AUSA, whose job is really unique, and there are 10 of these around the nation. That job is to coordinate efforts across all law enforcement agencies, across states and districts, to make sure that we are catching every name, right? We are catching every missing relative, and then we are investigating and pursuing each one of those names and people on that database so that we can find resolution and answers for their families. And so the number one thing here is coordination and the sharing of information. Here in New Mexico, we're lucky because the FBI, in conjunction with all of our law enforcement partners, put together a database. It's the first in the nation. It covers all of New Mexico as well as the Navajo Nation. And it's a database of missing and murdered Indigenous people. With this public database, what we've been able to do is lean on the resources of many, many agencies, often whose networks and platforms and computers don't talk to each other. And by making a public-facing internet website, people have called in tips, people have called in information, And they've been able to remove a large number of names and, of course, update and replace over the past year. And so it really is coordinating the efforts, making sure everyone is sharing information, and then, of course, making sure that somebody is paying attention to the names on the list so that nobody is forgotten.
There are these places that need protection, but it's just about being in relationship with it. I don't have to alter it. I don't have to manipulate it. I see it, and if it's in need of like restoration or healing, like if a dam needs to come down, if a river needs to, go back to its natural flows, if something like salt cedar needs to be removed, it's like, how am I supporting this thing that I love, this entity, this piece of land that I love in its fullest expression.
Laura's conversation with author Michelle Otero is coming up in about 15 minutes. And you can watch part 2 of Russell's interview with U.S. Attorney Ubaez next week on New Mexico in Focus. This week, we're following new developments in a court battle that could continue to spell out how Albuquerque officials treat unhoused people in the city. On Wednesday, the state Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a case where the city asked the justices to throw out a lower court ruling that forbids police and other municipal workers from removing homeless people from public spaces or taking their property. Lawyers sued last fall, accusing the city of violating the constitutional rights of unhoused people living at Coronado Park and elsewhere by destroying their belongings and shuffling them from place to place around the city without notice. In October, I interviewed 2 attorneys who filed the lawsuit about their case and what steps the city could take to address homelessness. Adam Flores, Martha Mulvaney, thanks so much for joining me here on New Mexico in Focus.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, your law firm sued the city of Albuquerque on behalf of several unhoused clients over policies and practices that created certain conditions for them and, frankly, for all unhoused people in the city. Martha, what were those conditions, and what were your clients and others like them facing in Albuquerque?
So Lou, I just want to say that what this case is about is ensuring that the city of Albuquerque respects the constitutional rights of everybody in our community, and that includes people who have been forced by their economic and other circumstances to live outside because they have no indoor place to live. And we filed this lawsuit because what we learned is that what the city was doing is that it was criminalizing the presence of unhoused people anywhere with their belongings on public property, even though the city knew that these people had no place to be indoors. And in addition, the city was seizing and destroying their personal property, and that included property that's essential for a person's survival. It included clothing, food, medicine, tents, blankets, the kinds of property that we all need in order to live.
And the broader context is that there's a housing shortage in the city, and so there just aren't enough homes to accommodate the number of people who are living in the city. And so as a result of that, there are necessarily going to be some people who have to live outside. And it turns out that the city's chosen method to address the crisis is the most costly and least effective method, which is criminal enforcement. And so what that looks like on the ground is police and sanitation workers will just descend on somebody who's camping outside and then order the person to move. And so people are just being shuffled around the city. Their belongings are being destroyed in the process. And the process just repeats over and over aimlessly without accomplishing anything. And so we brought the lawsuit because the city can make foolish decisions, it can waste public funds, but what it can't do is violate people's constitutional rights. And so we're just reminding the city that the New Mexico Constitution applies to people who are experiencing homelessness as well.
Sure. Now, those policies and practices that both of you just mentioned, are those still in place right now?
They are. The city's continuing to engage in these practices. We obtained a preliminary injunction from the district court, but it doesn't go into effect until November 1st. And so we've heard that the city is continuing to harass and cite people for their presence outdoors on public property and take and destroy their belongings.
Now, your clients won a victory in Judge Joshua Allison's courtroom a couple of weeks ago, and we'll get to some of those details in a bit. You've both mentioned some already, but every lawsuit, of course, has to have a legal basis. Adam, you mentioned the constitutional violations. But from the perspective of your case, what specific policies and practices are violating what specific constitutional rights?
So the core of the case is the New Mexico Constitution's cruel and unusual punishment clause, and the idea there is that it goes back to the housing shortage. There are going to be people who are forced to live outdoors. They don't have access to indoor space, and so when the city comes and responds to that by enacting a web of ordinances that makes it a crime to occupy every square inch of public property, which is what's happened. You can't block a sidewalk, you can't stay in an alleyway, you can't stay in a public park, you can't occupy a public lot, you can't erect a tent anywhere in the city. The result of that is that a person's presence anywhere becomes a crime. And so, one of our named plaintiffs is Sonia Garcia. She recently was fortunate enough to get a hotel voucher, so she was off the streets for a couple weeks. But once that expires, she's back outdoors, living outside, sheltering outside again. And I can pretty much guarantee you, I don't know where she is right now, but I can pretty much guarantee you that she's violating some city ordinance right now because she has to be. And so that raises constitutional concerns for the city because you cannot criminalize a person's existence, which is what's happening. The second set of claims, which Martha mentioned earlier, are related to the destruction of people's property. And so these are real basic, we are all familiar with property rights and our property interests. So, I can expect that I can walk down the street and police aren't going to seize my glasses and throw them in the trash truck, or your pen or your phone or anything like that. But it's a process that's become normalized for people who are unhoused. The city, I think, thinks that their belongings are trash. Doesn't matter what they are, their blankets, tents, their medication, the documents that they need to access services. They're all subject to immediate seizure and destruction on the spot. So ordinarily, there are all sorts of procedural protections that people have from that. You get a hearing before your property can be seized. You have a right to retrieve your belongings after they're seized, or a post-deprivation hearing after your property is seized. The city's practice is not to apply any of those protections to people who are experiencing homelessness.
Now, much of the focus surrounding this case has been on the city's decision to clear an encampment that was at Coronado Park. Now, keeping in mind the constitutional protections that Adam just mentioned, Martha, what happened at Coronado and what specifically did the city do there?
So what happened at Coronado Park is that for a long time, the city sort of passively permitted people to stay at Coronado Park. And then at some point, for reasons that aren't clear, decided that it wasn't going to do that anymore. So although people had developed an expectation that they could stay at Coronado Park safely, the city closed it without informing people that it was going to do that. Instead, the city had a practice of conducting cleanings every 2 weeks, and so it behaved as if it was going to conduct an ordinary cleaning. But what happened is that the city came and started just seizing and destroying people's belongings. And even when people got out of the park and were trying to leave with their belongings, the city seized and destroyed their property that was out on the sidewalk. And then the city closed the park, fenced it off, and flooded it. And of course, the city is under no obligation to provide places for people to be. But if it chooses not to provide places for people to be, then it cannot enforce the criminal law against them.
Now, something that you've mentioned several times, Adam, is something that I definitely want to talk about, and that's the core contention that the city has made it impossible for unhoused people to be anywhere, and that city officials have criminalized a state of existence, as you've said. As Judge Allison put it in his order granting the injunction, everybody has to be someplace. Can you talk about that just from a basic human rights perspective?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's, when you think about it in terms of cruel and unusual punishment or the legal standards, it gets a little murky, but the basic right is that you have to be somewhere. And if because of macroeconomic trends, you're priced out of the housing market and you're now being priced out of the rental market and you no longer have access to indoor space, you have to be able to access outdoor public space or else you cannot be anywhere. And so it really is criminalizing people's existence.
Now, of course, there are concerns from residents and business owners about the impact of homelessness on the broader community. What conversation would you like to have, Adam, with folks who would contend that your lawsuit might make this long-standing issue even worse?
Well, I mean, I'd really push back against the narrative that, or the notion that the lawsuit is part of the problem or in any way contributes to the problem, or that the court's order contributes to this problem. This is a problem that the city created. This is a problem that the city can solve. And if this lawsuit went away tomorrow, this lawsuit, which is designed to protect people's rights, went away tomorrow, that would have no impact on the housing crisis. It wouldn't eliminate the housing crisis, and it wouldn't reduce the number of people who are forced to sleep outside by one person.
Now, Martha, why isn't the city's public interest in maintaining safe and clean public spaces enough to justify some of those practices, the seizures, the removals that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, so the city has tried to make that claim that it has a particular interest in safety and cleanliness related to unhoused people. But what the city's really trying to do is create a homelessness exception to the Constitution. All human beings create trash. Some human beings among every population commit crimes, and the city has constitutional ways to manage those issues. With respect to trash, the city has developed a comprehensive waste management system that works very effectively for people with homes. And the fact that it's chosen not to do that with respect to people who are forced by circumstances to live outdoors is a failure of municipal waste policy. It's not some inherent condition of homelessness. And similarly, with respect to crime, people who live in homes commit crimes, and when they do, the city doesn't clear entire neighborhoods or seize everybody's property. What it does is what it constitutionally is permitted to do, which is develop probable cause as to specific individuals regarding specific offenses and prosecuting them in accordance with the Constitution. And the city can take those same actions with respect to unhoused people.
Now, the mayor told me in May that this litigation was coming to a close. Clearly, that's not the case. What has the city's response been like in court, Adam?
Yeah, I think I actually saw that interview in May, and I think that the mayor doesn't take us seriously and doesn't take this issue seriously, which should be very concerning for everybody who lives in the city. This is not, as I mentioned, when the lawsuit ends, if this lawsuit goes away, that's not going to reduce homelessness. That's not going to solve any of these problems.
Given their posture, what do you think that means for the prospect of policy and procedure changes?
I don't know I really don't know what the city is going to do. I hope that the city looks for proactive solutions, looks for other ideas other than criminal enforcement, but I don't know. I'm not sure what the city's going to do.
I just wanted to add, so of course, nothing about our lawsuit requires the city to take any affirmative steps to solve the homelessness crisis. But having people living outside in tents is not good for anybody. It's not good for the people who are forced to live outdoors. It's not good for the businesses, the residents, the tourists who would like access to those public spaces. And it's not good for the city that's going to have to be handling unhappy constituents. The only solution to the problem of homelessness is housing. And emergency shelter should be for just that, for housing emergencies. For example, if a person has to leave her home because of domestic violence, or if a person loses his employment because of an illness and is evicted, we need emergency shelters for housing emergencies. And in the meantime, if the city doesn't want unhoused people just living all over the city would do well to create spaces where unhoused people who are forced to live outdoors can be and provide services. All human beings need access to toilets, they need showers, they need laundry services. And those kinds of services would make it possible for housed people and unhoused people to live more comfortably in the spaces that we share.
Now, a lot of our viewers will be familiar with big court cases that resulted in consent decrees, reforms in conditions in jails, prisons, police reforms. Adam, what comes next in this case, and is a long-term court oversight situation possible in the context of unhoused people?
Yeah, it's possible. Right now we have a preliminary injunction, which means that this order applies until the lawsuit's resolved on the merits. So there's a trial scheduled in the summer, and in theory the case could be resolved at that time, and then ongoing consent decree is a possibility, monitoring of some sort is a possibility. But at the end of this, if we prevail, there will be some order that ensures that the city has to comply with the Constitution when it interacts with people who are experiencing homelessness.
We've seen problems persist in those cases that have had consent decrees issued. Is there a reason to believe that a consent decree in this case would be effective?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm not. If there's a consent decree in this case, it would be effective because we would be monitoring and enforcing the consent decree. So, just the attorneys and the civil rights leaders who are involved in the case would make sure that the consent decree is effective.
Now, one takeaway that we had while reading Judge Allison's order is that the city must do something now. And that's unprecedented in the context of this issue in particular. I'm not going to ask either of you to offer a roadmap of what that might look like. It's not your job, Martha, that's the city's job, but what will this require in terms of a philosophical shift?
I think that the city needs to understand that it has a basic obligation to all of its constituents. That includes housed people and unhoused people alike. And as I mentioned before, nobody wants to live in a city where people are forced to live outdoors. It's in everybody's interest for the city to resolve the housing crisis and to create emergency shelters that are only for emergencies, and in the meantime to create spaces where unhoused people who are forced to live outdoors can be and provide services.
Martha Mulvaney, Adam Flores, thanks so much for joining me on New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Late fall is when the sandhill cranes return to the valley for winter. Today we appreciate their primordial calls. And the clunky grace of their landings in the river, where they shelter for the night away from predators.
Laura's look inside the Bosque is coming up in a little over 15 minutes. Now, regarding those legal issues surrounding homeless encampments, the state Supreme Court did not rule on the case this week, and Chief Justice Shannon Bacon signaled that there's still plenty to sort out at the district court level before the justices might meaningfully step in. A hearing is scheduled for January 12th in front of Joshua Allison, the original judge presiding over the case in Bernalillo County. We'll let you know what happens. Now we turn to Michelle Otero, the City of Albuquerque's Poet Laureate from 2018 through 2020. In 2021, her debut poetry collection was published, Bosque. In a conversation that first aired in June, Our Land's Laura Paskus asked Otero about her recently published memoir, Vessels, A Memory of Borders, and about the process of writing as an act of healing.
Hi, Michelle Otero. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Laura. Glad to be here.
So you grew up in Deming.
Yes.
How did that landscape and that proximity to the border, how did that shape you and your writing and your attentiveness, which comes through so much in your writing?
I think that landscape, I really took it for granted when I was a kid, because that's how everything looked. So all the things with flowers can also poke you and hurt you. I just remember how hard my parents tried to grow grass, like for years, and they tried everything. They would do like sod or then manure and it really wasn't, I'm kind of glad we didn't have the internet then, because I didn't know, there was a lot I didn't know about this whole aesthetic of like, you have to have a lush lawn and these huge trees. It just wasn't what I grew up with. So I actually really appreciate being in spaces where you can see the sky, where things that are beautiful have protection around them, where you kind of know your place in the world. When you grow up in that landscape, I think, and this one too, you realize like you're a teeny tiny part of it and not the center. And I think that shows up a lot in my writing. I don't know if I had a real concept of like the border, like the international border, because there was so much, they're in such close proximity to each other that Mexico almost didn't feel like another country in really conscious ways. And then in profound ways, it totally did, right? So, in Deming and that whole area, there's cotton, there's chili. Most of the people picking that are from Mexico. And so I just remember seeing like school buses with, I don't know if it's in this book or something else I wrote, of almost like a sad baseball team, like going out to these fields and picking. And I had an idea that was really hard, backbreaking work. And then also, because I didn't grow up speaking Spanish, there was a way that border did feel like a divider. I thought, maybe I'll learn Spanish. It'll be like my period. Like when I get my period, I'll gain the ability to speak Spanish. So in that sense, it was, I was pressed right up against it, and then also very separate from it, just in terms of like language. And then also, as I've gotten older, I think the privileges, like the stark contrast between what it means to have US citizenship and what it means to not have that, especially if you're from Mexico, has just become more and more pronounced as I've become more conscious too.
I was wondering if you could read a short passage on page 158. This is someone who's giving you some advice. Would you start with Alma said?
Alma said, "Your mind is like a river, and each trauma pollutes the river. When you retell the trauma, you take the junk out so the water can flow again. You turn full color memories to black and white, so it's like a picture you're seeing. Instead of a movie, you keep reliving."
Given the work that you do and the things that you think about and write about, how do we best process trauma on our bodies?
I think the writing process actually really parallels the healing process, where initially we just like spit out, whatever that process is, like as many words as we can, especially for writing. Well, I'm most familiar with creative nonfiction and poetry, but I think if you're doing any form of writing that is about just getting the story out. And I think early in a therapeutic process, it might be like everything is so jumbled that it's just words and maybe they feel disconnected. And then there's the process of going back and making meaning of those things. So in the writing process, I have, I don't know how many drafts of this book I went through. I said it took me 18 years to write, so many, many, many words that actually aren't in this book. And I think that's true of like a healing process as well, where you go back and you layer on meaning, you shape things, and then eventually you incorporate that meaning back into the larger story of your life. So I think that there are ways to do that that are with somebody like Alma, who's the therapist in this book and was so helpful to me. It's not her real name, but where she really accompanied me on a specific process about like going back into traumatic memories and holding them up and giving me the ability to be in both like hemispheres of my brain at the same time. So that instead of either just reporting the facts and being totally detached from emotion, or being so much in my emotion and having no like structure, through our work together, I was able to kind of integrate those memories in a way that is part of the larger story of my life and not the story. And I think that's also true of writing. So Bell Hooks talked about, may she rest in peace, how for many communities, sometimes the only access that they have to a therapeutic process is through writing. So I'm not a therapist, and I've also seen how healing the writing process can be for, I've worked mostly with women, but I've also seen how it's been therapeutic for like young men and for groups of other groups that I've worked with, for just being able to get a story down and then to complete the process of having that story witnessed and held by a community, whether that community is like your immediate family or your close friends or like the larger city or state where you live. that for me really completes the whole process.
Along those lines, are there lessons for us when we're trying to heal the traumas on landscapes, and what part might storytelling play there?
I think for both the writing process and like individual healing and also landscape, it comes down to relationship. And so, you know, when I was poet laureate, my project was all along the bosque. And so once a month I'd invite a poet to pick a spot in the bosque that they liked, and a poet whose work they wanted to celebrate. And it was all about kind of tricking people, either tricking people who loved the bosque into loving poetry, or tricking people who loved poetry into like loving the bosque. And I think, you know, when we think of land as an abstraction, where it's just like it's something just to be commodified or something out there that doesn't have much to do with me, then there's no imperative to protect it. But if I'm in relationship with land, much like I'm in relationship with my own story or in relationship with people I love, then the imperative to protect it becomes real. Or maybe it's not even so much protected, it's there are these places that need protection, but it's just about being in relationship with it. I don't have to alter it, I don't have to manipulate it. I see it, and if it's in need of like restoration or healing, like if a dam needs to come down, if a river needs to, you know, go back to its natural flows, if something like salt cedar needs to be removed, it's like, how am I supporting this thing that I love, this entity, this piece of land that I love in its fullest expression.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I have loved your poetry over the years, and I really, really love this memoir, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Laura and Michelle Otero for that interview. 1 in 4 New Mexico teens has missed school because they couldn't get period products. That's just one of several statistics that the nonprofit Free Flow New Mexico is working to reverse by expanding access to menstrual hygiene for people in the northern part of the state. The organization got its start 3 years ago by distributing menstrual materials, and now has 3 self-serve kiosks in Santa Fe where people can pick up a bag filled with everything they might need. Those kiosks are better known as period pods. Each one has free products available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. New Mexico in Focus correspondent Antonia Gonzalez recently spoke with the director of Free Flow New Mexico and 3 other people who've been vital in getting one location up and running at the public library branch in Santa Fe's South Side.
And I think that'll raise more awareness because what these are they're like the little libraries that you see in your neighborhoods, but instead of grabbing a book, you're grabbing a bag of period products. Each pod holds 300 bags per month. Each one is funded by a different fabulous foundation or community organization, and they are also pod tended.
And what comes in the pod? Like when someone comes and they get, you know, they take a bag, what's in the bag?
Each bag is filled with a 1-month supply of period products, of pads, tampons, liners. And there's also an offer in each bag which allows the recipient to receive either a period cup, period underwear, and so that it's a reusable item.
When it comes to the period pods, have you had any feedback?
We have been receiving amazing feedback from the period pods. Individuals are so excited to be able to have 24-hour accessibility to period products because your period does not wait for a 9 a.m. opening.
What has been the response for these to be here at the library?
Very, very, very positive. We've gotten a lot of questions, and I think it's really raising awareness because people didn't really think about before how inaccessible these can be sometimes. And how often people are having to make that choice. I think a lot of times people think of that as a problem that happens in other countries, and they don't realize that it's something that happens here in the U.S., every community.
Each pod is designed by local artists from that community.
We love it.
Anyways. You'll get to see their beautiful work and what inspires them and what has influenced them.
And why was that important to make sure you found an artist from the community to contribute?
It's important to find an artist from within each community.
My name is Selena Fernandez. I am from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I'm an artist.
For each community to assist itself.
Hola, mi nombre es Israel Aros, Chicano poet, muralist.
So we have pod tenders, and what those pod tenders are individuals within the community that the pod is located, and they're putting together the bags for their period pod, and they're managing it, and the artists are putting it in. And so we're looking for each community to build itself up and to give within itself.
It's important for us as men to understand that cycle. And it's part of a moon cycle, it's part of a 28-day cycle, it's part of nature. So in this box, I was putting all the different prayers that I've had this much understanding, because again, that's not biologically happening in my body, but it's also part of our spiritual connection. We all come from our mothers, we all have to understand those things.
He came in with his masculine energy, I came in with my feminine energy, and that itself was a lesson to be talked about, and how important it is for our young people and then like older people to recognize that, yeah, these things are so correlated and that we do need those two energies to keep this balance. I started doing a couple of stuff, which is my style of the Mexica Nahuatl style, a lot of codex to see here, and I mean, I was trying to center the voice of my community, my Mexican community, and just bring in those remedios and that remedy within my art, and remedies that have been passed on through my communities until it got to me and put them in this box. We have Coatlicue here, who is a goddess and is like Mother Earth, and then we have some Xochitl, which is flower, and the bottom I created my own manzanilla or chamomile, and then from there in the bottom you have a couple of other herbs like salvia, hierba del pollo, dahlia, and ruda, which are all Mexican herbs, or herbs that grow in Mexico and that my family has used, generations of their family has used, and people in Mexico continue to use. So that's what I did, and I centered that voice.
In U.S. contemporary times, sometimes we view the period and have really negative connotations to what it is or isn't, and not recognize that it brings life. Irregardless if a woman decides to bring life into this earth, that is part of a life-driving creator cycle. So the different elements that are in here are about creation. So on the top is the Olin and sacred womb design, going back to our ancestral visions. And on the other side has different historical ancestral figures that are associated with the moon, with the feminine, with the serpent energy, with different energies that, again, are part of that feminine cycle. I'm really grateful that they're at the libraries, because there's so many things, not just with this, that other resources that our Southside families need to have for free. Yeah. You know, it'd be nice that, you know, we have all these other different types of resources that are necessities that our community just needs to have.
And what's the importance of having it at two libraries? Because the library is somewhere where people are going. It's a place where the community goes.
Yeah, especially since COVID. The library sort of fell into this role of being a community center. Not that we always kind of were, but we were doing COVID tests, we were helping people get their vaccinations, and we kind of switched our model to where we were looking at what could help the people of Santa Fe the most. And so whether that was access to library materials, information, or in this case, period products, we want to be able to ensure that every person in Santa Fe has access to what they need to be successful, whatever that looks like.
And what are your hopes for more partnerships or anything that you hope that this, between the libraries and Free Flow New Mexico?
Well, we'd love to add one to the main library downtown. And anything that we can do to help raise awareness for this issue, whether it's being part of more campaigns or just being more vocal and posting about it ourselves, and just letting people know that this is an issue and it needs to be addressed.
1 out of 4 low-income menstruators report missing work, school, and other activities. Period products are a basic necessity, and when we supply individuals with their basic necessity, they are able to thrive. We literally have students who have dropped out or have been kicked out of school because of truancy, because they do not have enough period products to supply for their whole cycle, and they end up missing anywhere from 2 to 4 days of school per month, and those build.
And so what is your hope? I know you said you have a big announcement coming up, but what is your hope for ending period poverty, or at least addressing it in the way that your organization is?
Free Flow New Mexico would love to see every individual be able to strive to their personal success, and having their basic necessities taken care of is a way of doing that. Food, shelter, and period products are all bundled in together.
Wait.
Yeah.
We close tonight's episode with Hourland's Laura Paskus as she travels close to home, to Albuquerque's Bosque. In the fall and winter, it's an ideal location to spot not just sandhill cranes and migratory birds, but porcupines, beavers, and coyotes. Here's Laura's holiday card to this environmental gem.
In the Bosque along the Rio Grande, throughout the spring and the summer, we seek out the cottonwoods for shade, rely on the river for sustenance, to water our fields, or to cool our bodies from the noonday sun. In the autumn, we celebrate the brilliance of the cottonwoods when their canopies fire the riverbanks with yellow. But by late October, especially as night starts falling earlier, it's easy to take the Bosque for granted, or to stop walking beneath its canopy altogether. But I think it's the best time of year to be here. As the trees drop their leaves, it's easier to spot porcupines napping in cottonwoods and elm trees, or gnawing on bark, or finding the seeds of Russian olives. In the sands along the bank, you can see where beavers have lugged branches, dropped into the current of the river, or excavated holes to reach the tasty roots of tamarisk seedlings. Beavers themselves are hard to spot, but there are signs of their industriousness everywhere. Coyotes call out earlier in the evening, celebrating their hunt, or maybe just singing to the night. Massive mobs of crows that winter in the middle Rio Grande Valley, their numbers too big to even call murders, roost at night in the Bosque. They spend their days spread out across the city feeding, and then return to the Bosque at night, hundreds of them settling into the trees. Walk through their ranks, and they'll yell at you, drop nuts and small branches on your head, too. And of course, late fall is when the sandhill cranes return to the valley for winter. Today, we appreciate their primordial calls. And the clunky grace of their landings in the river, where they shelter for the night away from predators. They've migrated here for thousands and thousands and thousands of generations. Their habits as clear as the layers of limestone in the Sandia Mountains, their patterns tied inextricably to the sway of seasons. Today, watching the cranes along the river, it's something to imagine the blessing they must have been to the people who lived alongside the Rio Grande for centuries. To think of their mass arrival along with snow geese precisely as the weather turned cold and harvest season passed. Like New Mexicans, the Bosque, the Rio Grande, they are resilient. This river has flowed for millennia, These cottonwoods have stood since the 1940s. The forest, the wildlife have all survived the press of more and more people, more and more demands. But as the region warms, as the region dries, and everyone and everything demands more water, we also need to demand more for the river, more for the bosque. And remember, this too is our home. For New Mexico in Focus and Our Land, I'm Laura Paskus.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the viewers like you.